Here we are. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Christian Langalis. Over the last year and a half, I've had the pleasure and privilege of working at Tlon to integrate Bitcoin into Urbit. And now finally we've arrived at something of a Frankenstein moment. It's alive. Urbitcoin, as I call it, is something of a freak assemblage of a variety of bodies of software. And now it's finally time to plug it in and unleash it upon the world. So what will the villagers think? Well, all of my Bitcoin friends are probably wondering in disgust, just what is Urbit? Is it a shitcoin? Is it vaporware? Or could it actually be real? And to my colleagues at Tlon, I'm just a Bitcoin maximalist zealot bent on colonizing Urbit in the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And in a way, both of these are true. Putting Bitcoin on Urbit may be one of the only original ideas I've ever had. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share briefly a bit about how we got here, standing in the lab, bringing Urbitcoin to life. So in the past decade, many bridges burned. Of course, I'm not just talking about my budding career in finance. I'm talking about the failure of technocratic central banking, not to mention the failures of Web 2. Incremental reform has basically failed us, and it's made our situation something of a do or die. We have the imperative to advance Bitcoin and Urbit beyond escape velocity because there will be nothing functional remaining. So we have to change our lives. We not only have to design new practices, but we have to practice them. Fortunately, and this has been my sustaining joy throughout, it's a community effort. So the first thing you learn in Bitcoin, everyone's a scammer, not your keys, not your coins. Your full node is your personal server to the Bitcoin blockchain, and that blockchain is your responsibility to validate. And this much is obvious for cypherpunks and other readers of the Nakamoto Institute. But what about normies, Bitcoin's future adopters? Most of us bought our first Bitcoin on a centralized exchange. According to my king, Nick Carter, over 30% of Bitcoin still sit on these servers. If most Bitcoiners rely on these centralized services to interface with the Bitcoin network, we run a serious risk of co-option and compromise. We could lose Bitcoin's core principles, censorship resistance, permissionless access, and ultimately, its sound monetary policy. So buying Bitcoin is not enough. Bitcoiners face the imperative to adopt new practices or be separated from their coins. And unfortunately, for fully sovereign Bitcoin usage, the UX is just not there. On the left, this is Bitcoin Core, the wallet that comes with your full node. On the right, we have Cash App. You can see why people prefer the centralized solution. But fortunately, Urbit's time has come. Urbit is a computer designed to make running a personal server radically simple. It's intended to hold all your personal data and communicate peer-to-peer with other Urbits on the Urbit network, always under a cryptographically owned and permanent identity. And most importantly, your Urbit runs open source software that serves you. It doesn't exist for the purpose of profit or surveillance. Urbit has a lot going for it right now. The network has thousands of people on it. We have dozens of businesses and projects, and there's far more content than any one person could possibly digest on a given day. And so now, as the obvious next evolution, it's time to put payments on Urbit. So the symbiosis of sound money and sound computing is just now beginning. So I'd like to bring up to discuss a little more about the actual architectures that we've built my friend Josh Lehman, director of the Urbit Foundation and the technical whip for this Urbitcoin project. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Christian. All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about first the Urbit Foundation itself and what this is, which simply put, it's the organization that uses address space grants to reward contributors for building and improving Urbit itself. And I bring that up right now because it's very relevant to this project, which has been a huge effort from our entire community, both from Tlon, but in a large part from open source contributors to the ecosystem. And so these three individuals up top here, I want to give a shout out to specifically that helped put together the infrastructure for the Bitcoin wallet that we've built. And these three down below are all members at Tlon that helped take all the pieces, wrap them up, and turn it into an actual product. So a huge thanks to all of these folks. And I think, as you'll see, we're very happy with how this collaboration has turned out. So I want to shift gears now and talk a little bit about our wallet, about what Bitcoin on Urbit looks like. But to do so, we'll demonstrate that by means of contrast with existing solutions. And we'll kind of start with the most trustless, out-of-the-box experience that you might have using Bitcoin Core. So let's say you want to send some Bitcoin to your friend. What would you do? Well, you need to start by spinning up your own full node. Now, if you've done this, what you know is that this takes a while, and it's not exactly an easy thing. You need to know a little bit about the hardware that the computer is going to run on. You need to have enough disk space. You need to have a persistent connection in the computer to continue to be always on. It's not that straightforward. But if you do this, you get your node up and running, the next thing you need to do is work with your friend to get their public address. Your friend's going to need to go access their wallet. If they're using good OPSEC, they'll derive a child public key from their extended public key, and then they'll send that to you securely, hopefully using something like Signal. Now, this is manual. It's a very manual process, and therefore it's error prone. Doesn't make it hard, but it is, there are a lot of rooms to screw up. The next thing you'll do, you'll enter the address into this interface. You'll sign and send the transaction. Now, what you notice about this interface is that it's really a power tool. It's designed for people that really know what they're doing, right? It's not designed for your average person. Now, we know that because what people are generally doing is gravitating towards what I'll call Bitcoin as a service, right? Now, let's look at what that might look like. You're probably familiar with it. You and your friend, you download the Cash app. Then you send Bitcoin, right? Super easy. Obviously, that's the way to go, except for one small problem. You didn't actually send any Bitcoin to your friend because you didn't have any Bitcoin to begin with, and your friend doesn't. This company in the middle, Square in this case, they hold the keys, they hold the coins, and all you guys have are some IOUs. What you're doing is trusting that they keep good records of your balances and that they even have the reserves to back the IOUs that they've been handing out left and right. Now, that's, like one thing we know for certain is that they're not actually executing Bitcoin transactions. And I don't mean to pick on Cash App here and Square because there's plenty of other companies that have the exact same problem. If you are trusting some other company with your Bitcoin, you're not really using Bitcoin, and that's a problem. So let's look at what Bitcoin on Urbit looks like. Starts the same way. You and your friend, you want to send some coins to your friend. So this time, you're going to boot Urbits. This means you get an identity. You become WarF Podlex, your friend becomes pindet-timmut. And these identities are yours. You own them cryptographically. And not only that, but they double as Bitcoin keys themselves. So out of the box, if you have an Urbit, you also have a Bitcoin key pair. We can talk more about that later in the panel if you're curious. So at this point, your friend, because he's pindet-timmut, he definitely has a full node, which is already synced, and so he connects his Urbit to it. You, on the other hand, do not. So you know some guy who runs Zod, which you connect to in order to broadcast transactions and index your public addresses so that you know your balance. Now, in Bitcoin, they call this the Uncle Jim model, where you've got your Uncle Jim and he runs a node and lets you use it. We call it the provider pattern. Now, there is a little bit of trust involved here, but it's very different than what it looks like with Square. You're actually directly connecting to a Bitcoin node, right? You can pack your bags and move to any other node at any time. Right? They're interchangeable. And generally speaking, you're going to know the person that's actually running it. And it's a person, not a company, not some giant organization with no face. Okay, so moving on. You're all connected to the Bitcoin network. You've got your Urbits, which means you also have access to the Bitcoin wallet. You send some Bitcoin to your friend, and you send it to his Urbit ID, to pindet-timmut, not to an address. Right? Your wallet figures out under the hood how to map his ID to an address by asking him for one. And should you initiate another transaction, it's going to go ahead and generate a new address for you. Right? It uses BIP32 to derive a child public key. And this is all handled by your Urbits. Right? So we let Urbits, computers, do the computer stuff so you don't have to do this manual process and deal with addresses. So, all right, to recap, with Bitcoin Core, you own your keys, you control your node, but the UX is not great, which is why people gravitate towards Bitcoin as a service, where they don't own their keys, they don't own their coins, they don't control their node, but the UX is really nice. So what we're trying to accomplish here with Urbit, and what we believe we have, is to keep you in control of your keys, keep you in control of your node, and give you a really good experience using it. Ultimately, it feels like this. Right? You can hang out and communicate with your friends on Urbit. You can send money between each other. You understand the whole system and the fundamentals. Right? It just feels good. So enough talking. At this point, you probably want to see this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Christian and Galen, who are actually going to give you a live demo.
Thanks, Josh. Yes. So to the extent that Urbit has a good user experience, we really have a large debt of gratitude to pay to Galen, who has been the design vision behind it the entire way. So we're very happy to have him with us here today. He'll magically appear. Hey, Galen. And we'll run through landscape and the wallet itself. How you doing?
How's it going? Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Salon, so I'm sort of like one part of this whole operation, where, yeah, most of everything under the hood here was very much a community effort, which is amazing. And big thanks to Josh and everybody who contributed there just for making that happen. But yeah, I suppose if Christian is the Bitcoin maximalist, and we've got a few other ones here to give their potential stamp of approval, or at least to tell us what's wrong with this, I'm probably an Urbit maximalist more than anything else. And you know, my primary interest in Urbit really is in the user experience that it can deliver. So we used to have PC desks, and you could do whatever you wanted with them. They came as this kind of kit of parts that you could recombine and be creative with. And now on the network, we live with services that only do one thing and are sort of very siloed from one another. They're very restrictive. And ultimately, I think they don't feel as good to use as what a general purpose networked computer can give to you. And that's, of course, what Urbit is. So what I'm going to walk you through is the integration between the wallet and landscape, where landscape is our sort of like first main user experience. It's the thing that we built for ourselves, the first main sort of tool that's built on top of Urbit. So we're going to walk through this as if I was a hosted user. Tlon really does two things these days. We provide hosting that's still really in beta. You can check it out at tlon.io, where you just sign up and we run an Urbit for you in the cloud. And you go just open a browser to interact with landscape. And we also then, build landscape. Landscape is the thing that we depend on as a company and a community to stay connected. So this is, as you see here, this is running on a, this is running on testnet. So the wallet is expected to ship in a couple of weeks. Of course, a testnet is something that we don't need to worry too much about. So you can see also that this not secure thing is very much a demo scar, not a real thing. Anyway, wallet should come out on the 27th, and you'll see it like this. It'll appear as another tile in landscape. So for this sort of rough demo, we're going to borrow something from the real world, which is that Christian wants to climb Shasta, and he's been using landscape to coordinate with some friends about going to climb this mountain. So you can see he ported over some of the content from that group here. So a landscape group is just a group of people who share channels. Think of it actually as kind of similar to Discord in some ways, but also pretty different. So here we have, I think, a notebook where we're talking about where we're going to go, how we're going to get to the top of this thing. Here you can see the mountain itself and a campsite that I very much hope will not be that crowded when we arrive. We've been talking about gear, what we're going to need to actually pull this off in a collection. So these are links to external things. And then, of course, we've been talking to one another, coordinating and figuring out what we're going to do. And the important thing is that Christian, it looks like, if you see here, has made the arrangements for climbing passes, a cabin, and some camp food, I guess. So I owe him $250. And for the purposes of this demo, think of me as not someone, I don't care, I'm not technical, I'm not going to run my own node, but I just want to be able to send Christian money directly. We're able to interact directly over Landscape. He's hosting the group on his Urbit. When we connect, I send messages directly to him, and now I'm going to send money directly to him. So if I go to the home screen and open up the wallet, just pop it out in a new tab. The first thing I need to do is set a provider. So since I'm hosted by Talon, I know they run a provider under one of their galaxies called Zod. So let's see if Zod is online. Great. So we ping the provider, make sure they have a node bolted on and they can proxy my transactions. So I'm going to sign them in the browser here and send them over to Zod. So we'll set Zod as our peer node. Next, I need to input my master key. We'll do this quickly because it takes a minute for us to start deriving some public addresses that we want to send to our provider. So for those of you, probably many of you who have used Urbit before, we've always had this master key thing. So the master key is a master seed that we derive an Ethereum address that you own your Urbit ID with. And we always had this unusual key format, if you're technical, you look into it, because it basically always aimed at this, which is now you have one seed that can both own Ethereum assets and own Bitcoin. So right now we're iterating through the wallets, looking for one, there we go, that our provider knows about or that actually has funds in it. And this warning is important because while all of your key derivation, all the key material is only being handled in the browser, this thing still hasn't been audited. And so it's worth calling out, you are living recklessly when you're using this thing. So just only put petty cash in here. Be careful. This is experimental software. That being said, it is open source. You can look at what it's doing. You can modify it yourself. But anyway, be careful. So if we get that, we'll dismiss this. Oh, it's also worth mentioning, we're working on hardware wallet support, and there are other ways to put keys in. We like the master key format because it just has this username and password like interface, really, right? You can memorize this thing. I know that I am, in real life anyway, I'm Rathmel Ropdile. I can memorize my master key, and then I have identity and money in one string. It's actually kind of amazing. So if this wallet was actually just being initialized, this would obviously be empty. I could copy the address and go send Bitcoin to it. This is talking to the Bitcoin testnet, and on the testnet, I have an unreasonable amount of money in here. I don't recommend that you keep this much cash in the wallet, only enough to sort of play around with. So here we go. Let's send Christian some Bitcoin. We've been interacting on Landscape, so I'm pretty sure that the Christian I'm interacting with here is in fact the real Christian, meaning that his Urbit ID that I see as Malnut Fossum, it's probably him. We don't have a complicated reputation system, but we are able to socialize. So I know that this identity is probably the one that he owns. And then I can let Urbit sort of dereference that, figure out what his Bitcoin address is. So if I go here and I click on his name, I can copy that address, take it back to the address, paste it in. It'll go check, confirm that he has a Bitcoin address I can send to. Looks good. I think I owe him $250 for the total. I guess now I'm really committed. I'm going to have to make it to the top of Shasta. Let's sign this transaction. Pretty sure I'm going to have to enter my key again. So we'll copy that since it's a secret, paste it in. Let's send this Bitcoin. Oh, that was quick. You can see it. Here it is processing. It hasn't hit the, hasn't actually been broadcast yet. But this is pretty good. I definitely think of this as a kind of minimum viable user experience. I'm able to actually complete a transaction. If I don't really care that much about Bitcoin, it makes sense. Let's go and let Christian know that we paid him. And we'll see if he actually got it. Anyway, I think this thing is coming together really nicely. I think there's a lot to just this very simple social payments. But there's also quite a lot, like a long road ahead here. So the wallet is open source. Anyone could, take these primitives and expand on them. That's probably the most exciting part. What people will come up with, having this be sort of another tool within the toolkit of Urbit. We're working on something where you can create landscape groups that require payment for entry. So you'd say, hey, you need to pay $20 to get into this group, or you need to pay $10 a month to be a member. We're also working on Lightning support. So I didn't go through the fee setting, but you can also, of course, Bitcoin has relatively high fees, but you can set a relatively low fee between you and a good friend and trust that it'll get there eventually. So from a user experience perspective, I think this is super interesting. I'm excited to see what people come up with. I tend to think that there are some things we build on Urbit that are very much, we know exactly what we're going to do with them and we want them. Landscape is one of those things. And then there are things that are kind of these like prototypical parts that we know we want them to exist, but we're not quite sure what will happen once they exist and once people can use them. I think the wallet's one of those things. It's exciting because there's a certain amount of sort of uncertainty, really. Like, what will people do with this? We're not really sure. I'm sort of excited to find out. But I guess the main thing is that it gets the maximalist seal of approval. So I am going to invite, and it looks like Christian got the Bitcoin came through. Anyway, I'm going to invite Christian back. And I think he's got a guest here who's going to walk us through the, is this legit question? It's the most important question.
Absolutely. So in true Bitcoin spirit, don't trust, verify. I'm very pleased that today we have here to join us Marty Bent, who will duly give us our due grilling and make sure that we're not scamming, or at least not inadvertently, running some bad architectures under the hood. So, hey, Marty.
What's up, Christian? Thank you for having me. No, I mean, off the bat, I've been demoing this with you guys over the last few days, and it just looks really clean. And from an architecture perspective, if Urbit is truly self-sovereign, self-hosted compute operating system, I think it does, at least for me personally, seem to be up to snuff, right? If you could self-host it on your own hardware and then interact with your own node to pull addresses and stuff like that. And then, as Galen said, in the future with your own hardware wallet to pull an XPub from, like it seems like a great base from which to build on, particularly for Bitcoiners who are used to sending addresses through back channels like Signal or Keybase or something like that, which tend towards shitcoinery. Having the ability to have your self-sovereign computer with Urbit and be able to communicate directly with your peer who you want to send Bitcoin to, it seems like it's going in the right direction, right? And
well, I hope Matt Odell got all that.
He's probably still hung up with identity starting from me.
Anyway, thank you for being here. And I have some test subjects for you. I'd like to bring up Tim Luck-Miptev, who designed the architecture for the back end. And then also we have joining us Ed, aka Phablet Faster, who has been the champion of the beautiful visual design that you see. So, hey guys, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Tim, I'm going to let Marty have at you. But before I do, maybe you want to give a brief overview of how you think about, how you thought about designing the wallet.
Sure. I think you guys have talked about most of what we're going for, but I think the big overriding principle was, I know Galen showed it in the context of, using your master key to get an Urbit wallet there. But one of the biggest, most important things for me was to make sure that it was fully pluggable with sort of Bitcoin best practices. So a lot of the work went into kind of two things: making sure that it would interop with XPubs that you might bring in. So if you have your own wallet outside, you can just import the XPub and let people start sending it to you, money to you while generating new addresses for that. And then the other really important thing was, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought already. It's really late in my time zone. Sorry. So XPubs, Bitcoin best practices, and having good upgrade paths for security and stuff in the future. so that everything we could use here would be like both applicable to Lightning. Also, okay, that's where I wanted to go. Like, so that it's all written in like natively in Urbit, in Hoon. So we're only using like the Bitcoin node to like get information from the network that's accurate and to send it out. All of the actual processing is done inside Urbit, which we're already using on the Lightning bounty, which is out there to start, making that. So the cool thing about this is that it gives us like a lot of ways to build for the future as like these new use cases that Galen was talking about emerge.
So is that like a Hoon library to interact with Bitcoin RPC?
Yeah. So it's like literally called, BTC RPC. Along with actually, there's a set of like, a couple Hoon sort of libraries that implement a few different BIPs, like for PSBTs, a few other things, where basically we just sort of got them natively into Hoon, and then they're available for other potential Bitcoin related projects to use.
Mm-hmm. And so let's touch on the PSBT stuff, because I thought that was interesting when you made me aware of that yesterday, that you're natively using PSBT to construct these transactions and sign them, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So under the hood, like everything that this is actually one of my first times seeing the beautiful interface that Ed did, like really in action. And under the hood of that is actually just like when you say you want to send, some Bitcoin to your friend, it goes ahead and generates, the address, gets that back to you. And then your like Urbit node actually just constructs a PSBT, just a normal one that you could throw onto a cold card and have signed. That like under the hood, if you're using, the Urbit master ticket to do it, it'll send that over and sign it. And then it just takes back under the hood. I mean, you can probably, see it if you look at the code, just like a raw signed transaction. So that gives us a lot of really nice upgrade paths for people like, myself included, who might not want to keep some like, who might want to like interact by signing via a hardware wallet or something like that.
Oh yeah. And then Ed, one thing, I mean, this is more about how Bitcoin fits into Urbit and provides Urbit utility question, because that's one thing that a lot of mainstream journalists and observers will throw at Bitcoin, is that it does not provide utility for the world at large. But let's focus on Urbit and the utility that it provides this particular computer software. Like, how does Bitcoin fit into your stack, particularly from a user experience perspective, and how does it provide Urbiters with utility?
Yeah, so this was directed to me, right? I just wanted to be sure. All right. I think what Galen brought up during the original presentation of the software, as it stands, is that the way that we see this software is of being a primitive of sorts in a sort of greater system that is the sort of network and the computer all at once. In particular, one of the sort of precise ways that the Bitcoin wallet is situated up against Landscape, which is sort of the primary communications software suite that Tlon is building and that a lot of people are congregating on, is that we really wanted to highlight the sort of composable nature of these different agents that people can build rather easily, as long as you know who that is. So one of the things that we'll be seeing soon, which Galen had mentioned, was this notion of modifiers, which is a functionality that we're hoping to add soon to the groups and channels construct that one finds inside of Landscape. So what's going to be very interesting and quite beautiful, in my opinion, from a sort of systems design perspective, is that because your Urbit is aware of all the agents it's running or that are running on it all at once, the idea is that as soon as one has derived their XPub and integrated themselves into the wallet software in a formal way, Landscape already knows this right away. This is almost a way in which you can imagine many other software types being built and simultaneously all becoming aware that now a Bitcoin wallet has been attached, so to speak, to the greater system. So I think what the Bitcoin wallet is underlining is this more heavily composable nature that we want to begin accentuating really heavily in this half of the year.
Awesome. And then back to Tim. So we were talking about the Uncle Jim model and how you've worked that into Urbit, particularly with Bitcoin. I say let's dive further into how an Urbit ship connects to a full node, or maybe connects their own full node, connects a full node to a peer or to their own full node.
Yeah, so let's just talk about those two cases because they're actually fairly straightforward. The most difficult part would be, let's start with the one where you want to run your own full node connected to your Urbit. So what that's going to involve in practice, for the vast majority of cases is you have your computer, maybe you have like an external hard drive that you have synced to the Bitcoin to your Bitcoin full node. You start that up. We also require you currently, we might be able to get rid of this in the future, to have like ElectRS, like an Electrum indexer running next to it, just for those who are interested, because it lets you randomly query addresses, which lets us sync faster for now. And so then you would set that up. You would run a script to get that going. So that's running. Then you fire up, on your Urbit, there's a one-line command you would cut and paste if you're one of these people running a full node. And it would then connect your Urbit to the Bitcoin full node running on the same machine. Okay? And so then at that point, when the rest of what you saw in the demo would essentially be like where Galen went and said, okay, I want to use Tlon's computer Zod as my Urbit node. This would be, I would just use my own ship as it, and say I want to use Timlik Miptev as my Urbit node. And then from that point, everything else is the same under the hood. Now, if you want to use, let's say Christian is running a full node and I want to connect to him, what I would do then is I would make sure that his software had allowed me. It has, things under the hood where you can say, anyone who's in this Urbit group with me can have access to my full node. And maybe that's a group that you charge for if you want it, or maybe it's just a perk of being there. You can say things like just this list of people, I'm down to have it. You can say, I want to let anyone on the Urbit network do it. And then all I do is pretty much what you saw in the interface with Galen, where he just types it in. It actually, under the hood, it's just those two Urbit ships talking to each other. Okay, and so they basically just say, my ship says to Christian ship, am I approved to connect to you? And if I am, you'll see that green thing like he's an available node. I'll connect to him, and then at that point, under the hood, Urbit networking. This is a whole different topic. If anyone Bitcoiners watching are interested in getting into Urbit programming, it's a really fun rabbit hole. I've written a lot about it and kind of coordinate a lot of that stuff. But basically, it's very cool because under the hood, I just have a connection now to Christian, Timlik Miptev to pindet-timmut, and programmatically, from the perspective of the Bitcoin wallet running on my Urbit, it's exactly the same as if I'm connecting to the Urbit, when I was connected to my own Urbit full node. So in terms of stability, et cetera, it's basically just as good. The only question is making sure. In the current version, I have to trust Christian not to be, there is a privacy issue where I have to trust him not to be snooping. So you want to be really doing this with, Uncle Jim types. And if it's very sensitive, you would want to run your own full node for that. We can make some improvements to that in the next, as we add some more features. And I've done the code is there to be able to use things like block filters the way you would in Wasabi or something. It literally just has to be done. We've been sort of rushing as fast as we can to get all this out there. So, shout out to Isaac, Novelid Padtai, who's been working like crazy on this, and Ed as well on design. Because I threw this over to them sometime in, I think, February or end of January, and they've just been, going crazy to get everything integrated. Because I just sort of gave that core.
And Ed, what's it been like building like a UI and user experience on top of this technical architecture?
Oh, it's been wonderful. I think one of the sort of most exciting aspects to this entire project is that, sort of parallel to the idea that Urbit is a computer built from scratch, we can also sort of take a look at what financial tooling, wallets, money management, et cetera, looks like for the individual, and really consider it from sort of first principles. I think that alone is sort of the most exciting thing about this wallet. We'll note that everybody sort of loves to sing the praises of something like Cash App, which is incredibly good. Like its UX is beautiful, but even an application like this has its sort of things like power ups and such, where we can really focus on sort of this very simple use case, which is money on a fundamentally new computer. So that's been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I just follow on that and add that, like, once you have money on a computer, and particularly once we get Lightning, but it's already not that far just with Bitcoin, you're basically Stripe at that point when you can like programmatically say like attach a. The big thing, I guess I forgot to say, the big thing I was going for here was to make it possible to sort of stably, reliably associate a Bitcoin transaction on the chain for a certain amount of money and sort of inject it programmatically into Urbit. So it's not just that I can send Christian money. It's that after I've sent him money in both of our Urbits, and in particular, like let's say mine, or actually in his, let's say if he's selling me a service, it's recorded that I sent him money on this date for this much. And it's not just a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. It has the metadata of me doing it, potentially, you know, an application associated with it, if we start thinking of it as like a receipt or an invoice. And other programs inside Urbit can reference that invoice and start saying, like any other program, well, there's permissioning aside, but another program on Christian's Urbit could say something like, you know, give access to this like program to anyone who's paid me to join my group or something. So essentially you've sort of injected Bitcoin into this programmatic context where you can start adding all types of meta information on top of it. And at that point, it's, you know, a better version of Stripe is like in view.
Yeah, no, a very quick sort of addition to this is that for something as sort of banal as like the alert sort of function inside of like a browser where I can call up a little thing that says, hey, this is a warning. I think the sort of invoicing pattern that was mentioned here is something that we're really excited to crack open and allow other people to use very easily. The sort of notion of having money be something that can be so easily sort of summoned up in the interface is quite exciting.
Yeah, I can't just stop thinking about like one of the biggest problems that many in the Bitcoin space and beyond in the cryptocurrency space have been trying to solve, which is like ID on the blockchain and like trying to tie it in second and third layers or maybe even directly at the protocol layer. But it seems like you guys are building an ID system in parallel and just sort of anchoring Bitcoin
we have the ID, and now it's like sort of all of the work is reliably programmatically connecting it to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Both at the layer 1 and then at the Lightning level. That's why it's so exciting.
Yeah. If I could add on that, you know, I don't know if anyone knows of Tim May's email signature, which is a description of the compounding primitives that lead to his theory of crypto anarchy. And of course, it begins with encryption and then goes through digital money. And then shortly after, you have digital identity. And following that, you can obtain online digital reputations that are durable, robust, and trustworthy. And in terms of obtaining higher level, more descriptive and sort of rich online experiences that are disintermediated, you would want to have robust cryptographic reputations that could be predicated on, say, your Bitcoin transaction history or that is also linked to your Urbit ID. So that's really when I put my, you know, Tim May like cypherpunk hat on. That's really what ultimately got me into this project, which was, okay, how do you make a really good decentralized exchange that doesn't rely on a third party for storing reputation data? How can you do that? How can you operate that on a global scale? You need to have both. You need to have a cryptographic environment that can address both transactions and the people making them.
And I think the impetus for you guys bringing me up here is like the Bitcoin maxi trying to poke holes in this, but I think something I've been parroting for years now, and that I think you guys are accomplishing, is just creating optionality for Bitcoiners, right? Like you don't have to use the Uncle Jim model if you don't want to. It's obviously a step in the right direction as opposed to the centralized exchanges where they're storing all your transaction history, in personal meat space identifying information and all that. And like this is a step towards full sovereignty, and you can actually even achieve full sovereignty if you're so willing to run the necessary hardware and software that allows you to run an Urbit computer and a Bitcoin full node in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, actually, just real quick. I mean, one of the things I was most nervous about when I agreed with Josh to do this project in, I think it was late August or September, and then started in October, because I hadn't done any like particular like Bitcoin programming there, was actually I thought like sort of anyone I interacted with in the specifically Bitcoin part of it would be overly nitpicky with, various design decisions. And that just hasn't been the case at all. People have been super helpful. And we even should shout out to Christian, connected us with Justin Moon, who was extremely helpful on the dev side. And like, even, within sort of the Urbit community, the Bitcoin, maxis there were, yeah, just like really good. And I think people kind of get it, that like, as long as you're doing it in good faith, people are insanely helpful. And it was just it was one of the best experiences of my life. And well, not over yet, but yeah.
Yeah. I guess that leads to another question. Like how much review has gone into this code base, and where can people peek into it and start reviewing if you guys need help in that regard?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you can peek into it. I need to check where we currently, because I had the repo living on my own GitHub, and I need to see whether it's been integrated into the Urbit one. If people want to help in that regard, either on I want to, learn Hoon and, get into like sort of maintaining this. We're extremely interested in that, and into potentially spinning this off in some ways, or getting like, someone else working in full time. If they want to sort of like just review it or talk about the architecture, and that we could possibly even make a grant for that, they should message me directly. Either through whatever channels they have to Tlon, or just get on Urbit and at Timlip. But all of, and we'll try to get, I think once we have this like actual like video up, we can probably add a link to whatever the current repo is. I think Ed should have it. And then from there, it would just be a matter of, just practically speaking, it would probably be best to talk to, me or Isaac or Ed or someone, just to orient to the code base, because coming in cold is a little harder, but it's right there. We can show it, and we're, would be like very happy to get those eyeballs on it.
Yeah, there's a grant, I believe, right, Tim?
There's not currently a grant for this. Currently, there's a grant being worked on, a proposal for Lightning, that's already being started, that I'm working with contributors on. In terms of like the sort of further improvements to the Bitcoin wallet, we're still figuring out, exactly what the path is for that. But, if anyone is motivated to, contribute anytime there, wants to get involved with us, that would be awesome. And I'd be very happy to do my part to get them familiar with Hoon, et cetera.
Got it. And in terms of our specific short-term timeline, we have a QA period running for the next month. So sadly, you guys have to wait one more month to get that beautiful OTA. But we will be reviewing and bug testing. There may also be a bug bounty that we're going to create, just so that we can make sure that the thing is airtight by the end of the month, or excuse me, in 1 month.
I guess just like philosophically, a question throw out there is, why should a skeptical hardcore Bitcoin maxi, I hate using the term maxi, but since that's exactly what we're going with, why should they be passionate about Bitcoin used in this way and interacting with Urbit in this way and using Bitcoin in Urbit?
Sure, I'll take the question. I think Bitcoin maximalists, and I count myself as one. I mean, I don't quite reject the term as much as you maybe, Marty, but I think that because we are a very strong community, and we support each other in cultivating these best practices, like running a full node, storing your keys responsibly, getting your keys off the exchange. Ultimately, we realize that for better or for worse, the knowledge transfer of like high power Bitcoin maximalist, best practice knowledge does not penetrate through the population as fast as people adopt Bitcoin. It's much easier to pitch someone on Bitcoin than it is to give the rejoinder, oh, and hey, buy a 1 terabyte hard drive and a Raspberry Pi, and start spinning that stuff up. So I think if we acknowledge the latency in obtaining best practices, we want to be able to automate them as quickly as people can sort of get to their entry point in Bitcoin. And I think that Urbit is basically a way to do that.
I think I have an answer here that sort of leans a little bit more on the sort of original philosophical arguments that underpin Urbit as a project, even to begin with, which is that there is a world in which a truly personal computer can exist. Right now, even the machines sitting in front of us that are supposedly contained inside of laptop hardware that is personal, it isn't personal. These things outreach into this sort of vast web of just various technologies that corporations own. So I think along with this alignment, making Bitcoin as simple as Christian was mentioning, as a sort of very exciting and just very new way of thinking about value is something that we're just very aligned with. The projects, I think, just are like bread and butter. They go along with one another quite well.
All right, I'll give an even different answer. So I think that if you think about Bitcoin maximalism, it's almost two concepts, roughly. One is that Bitcoin will beat everything else as money, and so it's sort of a waste of time to worry about other stuff as money. And then also that it's best to sort of, rather than sort of just innovating for its own sake, you kind of want to hold that off. So essentially get the money part working as well as you can, then take what a lot of people thought was a long time with Lightning, but now that's starting to work at that layer, and keep sort of pushing this stuff up and not try to do the ETH thing where it's the entire kitchen sink in one place. And so Urbit, in my opinion, as someone who's very into Bitcoin as money, it's almost like you get this really nice separation of concerns. You let Bitcoin be money, and then everything else in life, in terms of your identity, socializing, the virtual part of it, you can still talk to people in real life if you're a loser. But the rest of it should just be on Urbit. So Urbit is the coordinator for all of that, and essentially it's almost what you need in order to unlock. It's almost like you get to Bitcoin as money. Everyone has it. Its market cap goes way up, so there's way more monetary energy invested there. And now it's oh shit, we're here. We can do all this stuff inside Urbit. So it's all about unlocking that, and that's where these primitives and building on them are so big, because we're just on the cusp of once you sort of inject Bitcoin into Urbit, then all this stuff starts to open up, because Urbit is everyone connected to each other in really interesting ways that sort of mirror ways that are sort of good for our brains and easy to handle.
Yeah. No, that's sort of the realization I came to when I was describing as two systems in parallel, Bitcoin just sort of anchoring into it. And I guess another
compounding on each other.
Yeah, exactly. And this may be a stupid question, but this is something I just can't stop thinking about the last few minutes. Could Urbit help at the Bitcoin P2P layer? Could you send, particularly around broadcasting transactions, could you, since it's PSBT, could you construct a transaction on your ship and then have a trusted friend broadcast a transaction for you from their ship? And so your IP address is not associated with the transaction being broadcasted, actually.
Yes. Without even the PSBT part, because you sign it yourself and then inject that transaction back into that signed transaction back into your Urbit. And at that point, you could, in the current version, you could have your full node provider be a friend whose IP isn't associated with you, or maybe who has different stuff running through it to kind of put that together. Or, in a future version, it would not be very hard to do some kind of, Urbit gossip or onion routing thing where it goes through some kind of random node. It's, again, another plug for any interested programmers who want to get into Urbit programming. But one of the most fun things about it is just the network layer is really fun to work with. That kind of stuff is trivial.
I would say.
Broadcasting as a service or something like that.
Yeah. So we're really into the idea of X as a service. It's become like a really fun thing to start playing with because like once you can programmatically have some computer that has more different resources, you can start running, all kinds of things to that. So on the, financial side, like, Lightning as a service is going to be like very cool. We're even starting to wonder whether you could do stuff like, Lightning Pool through it and like, let different peers lease like capital to each other for channels. But it's honestly, there's not enough hours in the day. Like I just try to make sure like the basic stuff works and then keep going from there because the next like 5 or 10 years, I don't know. I just have to make myself take breaks because otherwise like there's just too much you can do that's cool once you start combining this stuff.
Well, that's like what we discussed yesterday. Like you're not going to get all this out of the box. You got to start somewhere. And like I said earlier, like this seems like a good primitive and a good start to build on, a good foundation.
Yeah, it's just like it's a little bit. Maybe frustrating is the bad word. Maybe frustrating like for my family because I'm like always working on something new or like doing it. But it's just you can just see like stuff to do for a long time. It's really it's crazy.
So would the biggest bottleneck to be contributing to the Bitcoin integrated in Urbit for outside developers, would that be getting up to speed with Hoon or something like that?
Yeah, we've had really good success lately with basically sending people who are like sort of moderately autodidactic, decent programmers, sending them to the Hoon tutorial and then the guide for how to build applications in Gall. I've had a lot of people sort of randomly come into me and be like, hey, I've learned like Hoon now and I'm kind of comfortable with this. I want to do stuff now. So it is like the bottleneck, but I would actually say in terms of just learning the language, it tends to not be that hard. It's more about kind of getting integrated with either the contributor community or with Tlon and just sort of learning best programming practices and kind of how the system works. So it's a barrier. It hasn't been that crazy. The language looks weird, I know, but for the people, like, it's fun. I recommend it. It's not that hard.
Well, let's dive into it because that's like one of the biggest knocks on Urbit that I've gotten from some of the core developers. Shout out James OB particularly. Like, why start from scratch with a new programming language like Hoon?
Yeah, it's not a hard question to answer. It's just like a kind of a long one. Essentially, one way that I answer it is that if you want to make some kind of like, self-contained system where people do stuff, essentially a system where people do stuff with each other, something peer-to-peer, you end up like inevitably doing one of three things, which is one, you may end up with sort of everyone is aligned in a database type program where you have like, which is basically most cloud services and SaaS services, right? Like Twitter is essentially, we're all lines in a database for them. And every Twitter action is like manipulating that database a little bit, right? So it doesn't have that many like rich interactions or ways to expand, but it is tractable for putting like, hundreds of millions of people onto like one service, right? The other thing you can do is reinvent Unix, or most of the time you just end up like getting back to Unix. So basically you start with that and then you're like, maybe I'll add some like richer interactions or something like that. And at the end of the day, every peer in the network ends up being a Unix sysadmin. Because if you're not really careful, you start letting, your operations that your program uses leak out. And then at that point, you're basically, Unix is a peer-to-peer networking system. So you end up just falling back to it. The other option is that you basically make your own self-contained OS. And very few people do it. Most people who start on it end up like basically making, they end up falling back to Unix, like at the end of the day, or simplifying things where you end up with sort of a lines in a database setup. So that kind of reduces to the simple answer of like, why do you have to make a whole new like operating system with its own language, et cetera? And the answer is that the only two alternatives are teaching millions of people to be Unix sysadmins, which is we already have a lot of evidence that's not going to happen, or falling back on this like very expedient but kind of hacky lines in a database model. Which we're all seeing the various consequences of that, which are like not just things like people getting deplatformed or whatever, but also just like the experiences aren't that rich. Like the amount of things I can do if I network with people on Twitter in like the Twitter platform is like pretty low and boring.
So I'm mostly on Urbit because like even in its kind of simple form right now, the interactions are better. I can make like better groups. I can do more things in them. We can then add new features like Bitcoin. So I would just like invite the people who are skeptical of it. Like, I get it. It sounds like kind of a not invented here thing, but like, I don't know, suspend disbelief a little bit, like think a little bit about what your actual alternatives are and look at like, you know, what inevitably happens with projects. And then once you're ready, just be grateful that some insane people put a ton of time into making this work and that you can just come in and, you know, learn Hoon and start making stuff on it. Like, I think gratitude is more appropriate than skepticism in some ways at this time in its life. That's how I feel. Like I just
But you didn't have to
project.
take the desert trip yourself.
Yeah, like I mean, I've only been really active on Urbit for about a year, but I've already been able to like, you know, meet a lot of cool people, do a lot of like cool, just like start building some cool systems and contributing. And it's because like all of the core infra people and people who like insanely, you know, Galen taking it through and people who just like insanely persevered when it looked like a, you know, unusably slow chat program. Like, yeah, you should be grateful.
Yeah. Christian, add anything to add to that specifically?
Not exactly on why Hoon, but I also think that just in an economic consequentialist view, having more people install Urbit, boot Urbit, and experience the Urbit network inevitably puts more servers out there and puts a very attractive incentive on finally booting that Bitcoin node or whatever the node in question is. So it's mostly a structure onto which you can build more, you know, sovereign practices. And I think that this may be a hot take, but I think that if Urbit works out, we could potentially see orders of magnitude increases in the number of Bitcoin nodes on the network.
When Urbit works out.
If it works out, yeah. When,
yeah.
I mean, Tim, the fact that you got introduced to Urbit last year and you're already up using Hoon building the library that interacts with Bitcoin RPC, that's pretty impressive, right? I mean,
well, Tim's also a genius, but
No, most of the honestly, I would say like the average like kind of person I get like kind of, let's call it like off the street, like sliding into my DMs who's like gone and used some of the materials we have is like probably a better programmer than I am. There's a lot of bright people in the world, and you know, Urbit is a good place to attract them. And yeah, you can do a lot pretty fast, and we've seen that like over and over. And the biggest focus of like, you know, just to plug the foundation again, is just like making sure that those people get like into the right stuff so that what they build like, you know, helps us towards like, you know, getting these primitives going. But that's probably the hardest part right now, having a clear vision of, you know, what's the next incremental step from each point. Sure. And keeping that synced up is non-trivial.
And then Tim, I think maybe from there you could mention that not only is it easy to get things up and running, but once they are running, it's far less maintenance. And maybe you could explain perhaps the technical, you know, reasons behind that.
Yeah, that's actually like such a big topic that I don't want to go into it too far, but I guess all I would say is that for anyone who's used to programming in very sort of fragile environments, of course, Urbit still has its quirks, but having like, you know, a whole tight, not that big operating system with like clearly defined ways for how it securely talks to peers, there is a lot less of a feeling of fragility in some ways. And I would just for people who are interested programmers who are either curious or skeptical or whatever, if I was giving a pitch for why to get into it, it would be like that would be a big part of it. You feel like you have a little bit more of a solid ground under you, and that you can go very deep into the internals at the base level of the system without having to go that deep. Like they're very close to you and very like tractable. So it's a cool feeling.
Not to mention that because programs run on other people's servers, there's no gigantic database to manage in the first place.
Yeah. And you also get out of this
no
for
big
anyone who's
ball of
done,
wax.
yeah, for anyone who's done like systems programming or lots of back-end stuff, I think just implicitly in your mind at all times is the feeling of like, how does this scale once like it succeeds and it's used by, millions of people? And Urbit definitely changes that once you are sort of fully peer-to-peer, because you can get lots of value. The easy way to say it is, if I want to interact with 100 people on Twitter, that requires the entire Twitter infrastructure running that in the background. Whereas for me to like have, an Urbit group of 100 people that I own, and that can like sort of never be taken away from me, I can put on any like piece of hardware I want, which I actually have thrown it all around the world, from like, Los Angeles to like on my laptop to sitting in Helsinki or something. It sort of fully commoditizes that. And you're just left with like, your computer is just processing the interactions for your Dunbar number. Of course, there are larger groups and you can like, get bigger. But just in my case, I have a couple small, Dunbar number size groups that I host. And those are all just like, run on my thing. And that's all that sort of has to be thought about for that, which is great.
It creates redundancy too, correct?
Yeah, it creates. So there's a lot of redundancy in terms of like, just not to go too much into it, but like, when you have like a chat or something, it's not a chat sitting on, Facebook or Twitter servers. It's a chat that like is a message essentially gets sent to my server to be approved, meaning like, is this person allowed to post to the chat? And then it gets synced out to all the other, 100 people in it. So it's like sort of fully redundant in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, it aligns very strongly with the Bitcoin ethos, is eliminate single points of failure as much as possible.
Definitely. I think the other thing it does somewhat similar to Bitcoin is kind of, you sort of like commoditize hardware in a lot of ways. So it's not, so for Bitcoin nodes, people don't think a lot about like getting locked into like, AWS or something.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, it's simple.
That's one thing I say a lot, right? It's like, a lot of people view Bitcoin as a software revolution, which it certainly is. The combination of technologies that have been put together to create the Bitcoin network is genius, but it's also a hardware revolution at the end of the day. You need physical infrastructure to make sure that the system is sufficiently robust, correct?
Yeah. And like probably the coolest thing about Urbit, once you kind of get it, is like that you can sort of use all different types of hardware without having to think about it, because it sort of locks that out and has the operating system. So I've run my main chips on like, a Raspberry Pi, on various cloud services on my laptop, and I don't have to think about that. It sort of just works.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of single points of failure, perhaps we should open it up now to the audience for some questions. So for those of you
follow
watching,
along in the chat, Christian,
we have people monitoring the chat on my Urbit group and also the YouTube stream. So Marty, if you want to grab some of these comments, or I can.
One comment that came up earlier, I think is just like an easy layup to start with, is like, how is this not a hot wallet?
So basically the answer is that it's probably best thought of as a sort of wallet manager, in much the same way that something like Wasabi is. Okay, where you basically bring in an XPub, and even when Galen was showing earlier that he was like signing by putting in his master ticket, that was not a hot wallet in the sense of like, a private key being stored in Urbit. That was actually going out to the Urbit ID managing program in a way that's like a little bit hot, but is like analogous to how a hardware wallet works, where just the transaction goes in and the signed transaction comes back out. And then also, like, I mean, the other way is just that you could take an XPub from your cold card and bring it in to the system like tomorrow, or as soon as it launches, and it would just like detect your balance. It would give you, transactions that you could sign by actually putting them back on there. But at no point would does the Urbit have any access to your private keys or anything. It just does all of the coordination, not signing.
And this should be relatively easy as well. What about sending and receiving Bitcoin with people who are not on Urbit?
Yeah. So in terms of if you want to send to someone who's not on Urbit, that's a fairly easy case where you just put in you coordinate an address from them in the usual manner you would today. You just ask them for an address. You put that address in the program and you send to it. Similarly for receiving, I don't think we've put in the stuff yet to be I want to generate an address to cut and paste to someone in Telegram or Keybase or something, but that would be a 1 hour, 30-minute thing to add to it that will add. It's essentially the short answer is how do you do it? Exactly the same way as you do today. Your Urbit is basically just sort of a wallet and it generates an address, much as in a current wallet where you say, give me a new address so I can send it to someone and have them sent to me.
Is the Bitcoin wallet UI coming to Landscape SPA?
So I can answer this one. The way in which this is being built out is that the Bitcoin app itself is actually a separate repository from the primary Landscape interface itself. One of the sort of interface-related problems that we're hoping to suss out and refine very heavily in the next quarter or so is what exactly Landscape represents as a software launching system, so to speak. So the idea is that over time, we'll likely be honing Landscape as we know it now to much more of a pure sort of communications application while we build a much more sort of properly scoped and just very simple software launching mechanism. So the idea is that Landscape as a sort of communications application and Bitcoin will coexist within some substrate that will be made a lot more legible very soon.
Awesome. Next question from Alan Farrington. Is there a competitive threat of Bitcoin Core just getting better UX with time? With reference to compare and contrast from very early on in the presentation.
No. I guess it would go back to my earlier answer about the types of systems you can make, but essentially Bitcoin Core doesn't have any idea of identity. And even if it did sort of build in kind of primitive IDs, in order to start doing what Urbit can do, you would have to build literally an entire. Your only two options in Bitcoin Core would be to make it its own cloud service, where it manages all those IDs and has actions they can do with each other, which is obviously horrible and should never happen. Or to have the Bitcoin Core developers decide they essentially want to build their own operating system around Bitcoin, which seems, I don't know, once Taproot gets activated, we can see if they can activate the full OS add-on upgrade, but I'm not holding my breath.
I don't even think that project will ever be approached.
Yeah.
It seems I mean,
the more complete and less flippant answer is that the amount of all the stuff that you really want to do isn't generating an address to send to someone. It's associating that address with which identity paid you, which programs was it for, what length of time, essentially invoices and all this, so that you can inject it into a full economic environment.
I'm sorry, and he's following up. Sorry, poorly phrased. I meant more in terms of attracting new users, not under the hood. I mean,
the answer is almost the same. There's just so much stuff you can do that will attract new users. I think Bitcoin Core can improve in terms of just the basic thing of I want to send money to someone I know. But I think what we're trying to unlock is everything beyond that. Essentially, everything that's currently that has hundreds of billions of dollars of market capitalization, the forms of companies like banks, Stripe, etc. That's where this is going.
Yeah, no, I think to sort of just put a pin on that too, there's this notion that money doesn't exist in a vacuum. The Bitcoin sort of node as a sort of sending and receiving mechanism will always have some sort of base utility as just a sort of standalone software that anyone can make use of. But I think what Urbit is really, and the sort of integration of Bitcoin into Urbit and vice versa, is this idea that what we're sort of unlocking is the soil into which one would sort of grow many different types of use cases or utility from that sort of conjoining of value or some way of exchanging value, and what social software even represents. So there's a bit of a sort of a greater ecosystem that we're hoping to build here.
Yeah, like Urbit is Venice.
I imagine the Bitcoin Core developers too would be happy that you guys are building Urbit in this way, and so they core, right, and not have to build the communications layer and the operating system and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, we kind of said earlier that like a lot of it with Bitcoin that it does well is you kind of push off these decisions until later. And now the time is coming, really, both in terms of Bitcoin's market cap having the monetary energy, and then just technically with stuff like Urbit coming to, start actually, like, they push it off until time, and now it's like time for that to happen. Yeah.
One question that came up after Alan's: can we utilize QR codes?
Yeah. Great question. Answer is not currently in there. Second answer is it should be. And if anyone's, a dev who's interested in that, that's going to like be something that gets in there over, as we keep like improving it.
Yeah, it's funny because early versions of this wallet's interface design did actually surface up the ability to receive Bitcoin via a QR code of some sort. It was dropped in the name of simplicity and just getting something very minimal out the door. But we still have an entire Bitcoin receiving and requesting interface story that really is in the middle of being developed right now as we speak. So this will all get there soon.
What level of privacy does the current iteration offer? Is your Urbit ID associated with the transactions on chain, or is all of that securely communicated just between the two ships?
Yeah. So the answer is on chain. No, we don't write extra an op return saying that this was pindet-timmut. It's a reasonable question. There are some various privacy leaks, some of which are inherent and some of which can be taken out over time. So the primary one to be aware of is that if you're not running your own node, your provider will be able to sort of know your transaction history for that address. So if you have a large amount of money going through it, or you want any kind of timing or amounts to be private, for now, you should be running your own node. There are some proposed improvements that are implementable that would mitigate that and make that not as much of a big deal, where you could still use your friend for the node, but not have to worry about him seeing exact amounts. There are then other private sort of basic Bitcoin privacy things that Marty alluded to earlier with your Urbit ship still has an IP when stuff goes out from that node, your full node there to the internet. So if that's if that's an issue, we'll introduce some facilities to let you broadcast through other nodes on the network in terms of broadcasting transactions and pulling stuff in. But the link between Urbit ships and the on-chain transaction, that is purely between you guys.
Awesome. Is there an HTOP type program for Urbit terminal?
I'm trying to think what he's going for here.
HTOP.
You mean the top program where you just check your resource usage?
I think bar masses is that more or less.
Yeah, where it shows how, seems a little bit unrelated, but yeah, I think it's bar mass, maybe a couple other things. We can check the resource usage of your Urbit. If you're interested in that, get in Urbit community or any of the other technical chats, and people can get that one for you.
One question from the Urbitcoiners group is, can you send multiple ships Bitcoin at the same time? So I think that this relates to, I guess, sending, Bitcoin you can send for fee optimization. You could combine a lot of transactions into, one individual spend. And I think the short answer is not at this time, but long term, maybe Tim wants to.
Yeah, not at this time, but we should definitely add it. And I think we'll try to get the repo link up there, or other modes of communication, like these should be submitted as, as issues or sort of future, like desired features. Like this stuff all needs to get in at some point.
Any more questions from your Urbitcoiners group?
Let's see. One is, can comets use the Bitcoin wallet? Would there be a dependency for comets to be routable first?
So the routable part doesn't matter. The answer actually, like currently, this is a sort of a code decision to do. I currently have it set to not allow comments to send payments, for the simple reason that one thing we didn't talk about, Marty, is like there's the best practice of generating a new address each time you do receive a payment, and if you let anyone in Urbit request an address from you, there's various ways that could get spammed. What we use is essentially the fact of the system, both in terms of how many IDs there will eventually be at the planet level, like with your Hadward lost step, is limited to a little over 4 billion. And what that means is that we can, on the network currently, it's it's numbered in the tens of thousands in terms of how many people are there. So as long as we use that as the gating, there's not a problem. But comments, someone could just spin up a ton of them, request and essentially deplete all of your wallet's addresses. So the routing isn't an issue, and someone can choose to make to allow comments to pay them, but there are some vulnerabilities there that we still need to figure out how to fix. This is sort of a broader topic where we're pretty optimistic that the PKI situation, in terms of not having to spend all our money paying Ethereum fees, will be fixed. Will be fixed soon. There's that work is ongoing and going really well, and moving into the sort of how to deploying it, testing it phase. And I think that would mitigate it, where I think it would then be very reasonable to be no comments for this stuff. No one likes comments.
Got a.
Oh, go ahead, Marty.
I was gonna say I've got a lack of questions, unless Christian, this one's probably.
Yeah, there is one question asked by Logan, which is, what is the specific plan for the OTA, and what is he adds on, is it a standard OTA or as its own package?
Ed? I think it should be standard, because you don't have to connect. You don't have to start using it. You can get the OTA and then say, I want to connect to this provider. But just sort of it would almost be like you just get wallet software delivered to you, and then you can decide whether you want to basically spin it up.
So it's opt-in. I like
Yes.
that. Pindet, can you talk about what role stars can have in the Urbitcoin system?
Sure. So short term, we have the node provider model that is, I guess, immediately deployable. Medium term, I think stars are the presumptive Lightning service providers to the Urbit network. So they would facilitate Lightning liquidity for a pool of Urbit chips. And I think that could actually be quite a compelling business model. Beyond that, more expressive usages of Bitcoin could be facilitated by stars, by which they could be escrows. They could run privacy tools, smelting pools, or however they're called. To actually, and this goes back to an earlier question, I fully believe that Urbit stands to enhance Bitcoin privacy because you can facilitate these sorts of washes. And then very long term, or not very long term, but sort of farthest out, would be something like operating some sort of Bitcoin decentralized exchange, arbitrating trades if they aren't completely hermetically described, and atomic. So I think there's a lot for stars to do. That completely ignores the opportunity for stars to host web stores or whatever other commercial, just vanilla commercial applications you want. All of your Urbit native services like hosting, content delivery, software distribution, these Urbit native services ought to be monetized with Bitcoin, at least in the future. So it doesn't even need to be a Bitcoin-centric market. Just use Bitcoin as money.
Which segues perfectly into the next question. What is missing to facilitate an atomic swap between Bitcoin and Ethereum, or Ether, BTC and ETH?
I don't know atomic swaps well enough. I can find some people who do, but my rough impression from what I know of them is like not much. You probably would have to do sort of a full ETH integration, which I can see the reasons for doing it. Like it's not, super hard and probably will get done by someone at some point, but not really rushing to do it. But yeah, I don't know the specifics, so I won't comment further.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just have to be an ETH implementation built into Urbit that
and we have somewhat, ETH querying capability because we do like read off ETH currently to get the IDs. Although we're still going to read off it, but in a way where ETH is a lot dumber. So it's not there's prior code and like prior art that can be built off. If someone really wanted this, it wouldn't be so crazy, I think.
Yeah, and who knows?
But why would you do it?
Yeah, who knows what ETH will look like in 6 months?
Yeah, exactly. We just have the Vitalik says what the new features are, and then we'll decide how to use this.
As Marty frequently chronicles, it takes the ETH crowd a little while to organize big projects.
It does. YouTube Live questions have run dry for me.
Have run dry. Okay, well, then we won't belabor it too much longer. Hannah, if you're there, would you mind sharing my other slide? Yes, excellent. So fixate on this information. The wallet OTA, just to mark your calendars, is May 27th. So be looking forward to that. And as a special one-time, super exclusive promotion, we will be sending 200 ships, some starter Bitcoin, just so that they can basically get their feet wet with the wallet, try out making a few payments. This isn't intended to be, some grand sweepstakes. It's mostly a practical consideration to save people the need to dust off their hardware wallet to fund their Bitcoin wallets on Urbit. So the way this will work is we will send you a DM on Urbit after the OTA comes out. You have 24 hours to respond and claim the BTC. So be on the lookout. And then up until then, we have several different avenues of getting on Urbit. You can self-host. Instructions are available at urbit.org. Or if you're a normie like me, you can get on Tlon hosting, which is probably the easiest method. But neither here nor there. So please reach out if you have any other questions about getting online. But the panel has disappeared. But thank you to Marty. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Galen. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Isaac, Piri. Thank you, Jose. Thanks to everyone who made this possible. I feel so blessed to have the opportunity to work with all of you. And I'm sure I'm leaving out plenty others. So I look forward to seeing you on the network, and you can all pay me Bitcoin there. Anyway, thanks everyone. We'll see you around.